Namaskar and welcome to this exciting show, Sattology, Debunking Mythology. Today we have a very special guest and a good friend who is going to talk to us about Agra. And Agra, what is the historical name, from where the name came from, and how one of the biggest monument they have, which is famous all over the world. Heads of state and anyone visiting India, they have one wish in their heart to visit this city, Agra. And there are many monuments over there. And one of the monuments is highlighted as an Indian treasure. And I call it a temple of lust or whatever you call it. But without demeaning the city, because city is beautiful, the places are wonderful. And we will discuss that from a very prominent friend and a guest, Shri Vikas Saraswat.
Namaste,
Namaskar.
namaste to everyone.
So, where is the origin of the word Agra come from?
uh, Aditya ji, uh, let me first start with the myth which has been propagated with respect to the name Agra, and there is a context to it. So I will just put a line or two about the context also. See what is happening in India here, that everything good is being attributed to the Muslim influence coming from the Middle East. Middle East, one can say. The Arabians or the Turks or the Mughals, Afghans. So we are told, our history has been told to our kids in a way that anything good came from there only. And with respect to it, no, it was told to us that several cities were actually uh, built up, constructed, or laid out by these people only, and or these good mega cities. It comes in a context like where they say that everything good cultural has come from there. So it is in that respect that historicity of Agra is also pinned with Sikandar Lodi. I won't say Mughals because there is a general conception that it came with Akbar, but that's not the case. Anybody who has a little serious interest in the history as a subject would know that it is basically attributed to Sikandar Lodhi.
Mhm.
Lodhis were the dynasty prior to the Mughals. Mughals got their power from the Lodhis only. 1526, there was a prominent battle, Battle of Panipat, where Babur, the founder of Mughal dynasty, he defeated Sikandar Lodhi, Sikandar Lodhi's son, in fact, Ibrahim Lodhi, and then gained the control of this part. Before that, it was Delhi Sultanate. And then, because at that time, Sikandar Lodhi had, if they say that Sikandar Lodhi had built the city of Agra, so the capital of the Mughals also for a period from Babur to Shah Jahan was there in Agra. Now there is a very interesting story what is told with respect to this historicity. What we are told that Sikandar Lodi commissioned uh, some of his fellows to go and search a place where he can have a new city built and then can quell certain kind of rebellions which keep on occurring in this area. As you all will know, that this is basically Agra and surroundings. The Braj area is Jat dominated. So not only the Jats, there were other clans also, the Gujars and others. Periodically, they would give some trouble to the uh, Delhi Sultanate. At that time, there was only Delhi Sultanate. Mughals had not come into picture. So he said, okay, coming from Delhi, going up to Itawa downstream, find me a place where we can build a good city. So he sent a team, and this team was led by one Mehtar Mullah Khan Nayak. And then they said, okay, we went around 180, 170 kilometers downstream. And then at a place which is now Agra, we found a place which is perfectly suitable for a new city. So because the place doesn't have a name, so this emperor asked, what is the place, what is the name of that place? So he said, we'll call it Aage Rah. Aage Rah in Urdu or in Persian would mean uh, ahead of the way, ahead of the way. Agera. This story is told by a gentleman called Naimatullah. And Naimatullah is one of the court writers or hagiographers in Sikandar Lodi's court. He gives us this story. But the interesting fact is, two interesting facts rather. First, the township which is supposed to have been built by Sikandar Lodi doesn't come up in the part which some of you would have visited, which is actually the west bank of the river Yamuna. Most of the city lies on the west bank of Yamuna. This Sikandar Lodi is supposed to have built his fortifications or his palaces or whatever came of the city on the east flank of the river. First thing is this. Secondly, a very interesting thing came up. This fellow was a liar, but not a very clever liar actually. So he himself has mentioned certain other people who have been the governors of Agra before this place. So a place which did not even have a name, you say that you gave that place a name Agera, and then the Sultan said, okay, we will put it as Agra. So then, how come you mention 20 years, 30, 40 years earlier to that, there so and so was the governor of that place? The fellow was not a very clever liar. Now, before coming to the Puranic historicity and ancient history, because not frankly admitting, no, not much of it is there historically, to be very honest, but there are traditions and there are beliefs which have been mentioned by several other people, as we will come to know in the course of this discussion. So what happens is, this place, we are told 1504 this city came into existence. Now this gentleman Niyamatullah himself, he mentions that there were previous governors of the city, and we took it from an estate of Bayana, which is around 70-80 kilometers from here on the west side. The interesting thing, there is a gentleman called Ibrahim Ghazni who had invaded, who went up to invade Kannauj, who invaded a fort called Kalinjar, which was a very important fort in those times. And there was another fort, Chandravir or Chandrapur, one fort was there. Besides that, he thinks Agra Fort is so prominent that it needs to be invaded, it needs to be attacked out of those three forts. So this is a major invasion which has taken place in 1080 AD. A court poet in his entourage, Masood Salman, what he writes about the Agra fort, and this is written history. We are not going to Puranic sources. This is a written down history. So Masood Salman, a Ghaznavi poet, he writes that the fort of Agra is built amidst the sand-like hills, and the battlements of it are like hillocks. No calamity had ever befallen its fortifications. This is what Masood Salman writes in 1080, about 420-25 years earlier to Sikandar Lodi. This is, and then Jahangir, in his biography, Tuzuke Jahangir, he also affirms that this place was there, and people, this came in the province of Bayana and later in the province of Bharatpur also. This has been later affirmed by Jahangir also. So here there is a clear, clear documented historical proof that the city existed much before Sikandar Lodi has supposed to have built it. Some more historicity, which is actually at a little later age. Ralph Fitch, a traveler, British traveler, he comes here in the city of 1585. Of course, Akbar was the king at that time, and Akbar is supposed to have renovated that old fort, which is now known as the Red Fort. And what Ralph Fitch writes is that Agra and Fatehpur is another city which Akbar is built. These are two great cities. This is what Ralph Fitch writes. And they are so great that they are much greater than London. And when you travel this 34, 37 kilometers of distance between the two cities, it is as if it's a continuous habitation. Something or the other is there on display for selling this thing that it's just 36 kilometer stretch. Even you won't find that appearance even now. But it was so populous, so habitated, and so thriving commercially that one could not find discontinuity. This is what Ralph Fitch writes. Now, again, one more traveler, William Finch. So William Finch, we all know, those who have followed the Ayodhya dispute, his testimony was used in the courts. William Finch is one more British traveler. He has also visited these parts, and he is writing somewhere in around 1600 and between 1605 and 1610 he must be writing. This I assume because 1612 or 13 he died in Babylon. So it would have taken some 2-3 years for him to move back also. And he has visited us in the time of Jahangir. So Jahangir's reign starts in 1604. Sorry, 1605. What William Finch writes is Agra is spacious, it is large, and populous beyond measure that you can hardly pass through the streets. Now tell me, a city just 100 years old, would that be so populous?
Not
Is
possible.
it possible?
Not possible.
So this is what we are told. Now it's not limited to Agra alone. If our discussion permits, I will take you to one very interesting anecdote which happened in the case of Fatehpur Sikri also,
Yes, please.
where the historicity was tried to be pegged in the time of Akbar only, and so what we call this Islamist lobby was rattled one prominent archaeologist D.V. Sharma said that okay, there is ample literary proof to prove that the city was not laid down by Akbar. It was in fact a much older city, and then there are literary evidences which will point that archaeological evidence exists. So he started excavations within the Fatehpur Sikri complex, and when he started those excavations, the whole lobby was rattled, and this was a very powerful lobby. If you remember Nurul Hassan, the education minister at 1969, he's a communist person. His co-brother, who was again a very prominent educationist, S.A.A. Rizvi, uh, his uh, his brother-in-law or someone who was the chief faculty in Aligarh Muslim University, he raised a lot of ruckus. He wanted to stop that archaeological excavation at any cost. But before that, D.V. Sharma had proved it, demonstrably proved. He actually came up. There is a tank inside the Fatehpur Sikri complex. He had dug out that, and he showed that place is called Anup Talao. He showed that there existed a Jain city below that. Ample proof was taken out. It was excavated from there. The historicity of that city, that town, went to somewhere around uh, 4th or 5th century AD. So the same is the case with Agra.
No, beautifully put. I think it's a very, very interesting conversation. The how can these people could not build anything in their own countries? Only in India you find their architecture. How is it possible?
Absolutely. Yes.
Just a basic logical point. Similar to logical point is Arya invasion theory. And when Hindus say, "How can we go? How is it practically possible?" I said, if it was practically possible for other people, how is it not practically possible for Indian soldiers to go? Very simple, because the way is
Yes.
the same. Whether you come from there to here, it's just
Or
like
from
saying that I can go from Delhi to Bombay, but I cannot come back from Bombay to Delhi.
yes.
So it's the same logic. I think that debunks it, because
Absolutely.
most of these people could not build anything in their own lands. Only now, and that too with the help of British architects and the American engineering firms, they're able to build something, including their mosques. So,
Absolutely.
so that's in Saudi Arabia, Shai Fazal Mosque, or what they call it.
Yeah.
It just they themselves debunk their own lies.
True.
Just few years back, American pilots used to say when they sold F-15 to Saudi Arabia, he said, "You don't have to sell F-15; you to also sell the men too to run it." So there were companies opened in America to support them in flying those machines.
Oh my God.
Finally, they got some Pakistanis and some other Turks to fly the machines for themselves. That's the
Okay.
condition they have.
My God.
And they built all these monuments they claim. In the history of the Middle East, there is not a single monument which is built from the local expertise. All has
Okay.
been imported, and that is
True.
until 2020. So what to speak of 1000 years back?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So my question to you is like, can we go into the historicity of
Yes.
why the Taj Mahal,
Uh,
or which is one of the biggest attractions they have there?
yes. So most of the buildings, as you said, Aditya ji, they are actually renovations. Taj Mahal also, if I mean, it could not have come from the scrap, or rather from, bare ground. Something might have existed and then it might have been renovated. Of course, I will not venture into it because I have not found ample proof with regard to that. I've gone through Stephen Knapp's book also. I've gone through Mr. P.N. Oak's work also. But there are other buildings, say like the Jama Masjid of Agra. It is There is a very old temple, or rather the most prominent temple of the city, called Mankameshwar, so which is very near to the mosque Jama Masjid. And as we all know, uh, Jama masjids in most cases used to come up in a place where the kafir, prominent most kafir place of worship is demolished, and in place of that, this grand mosque is built. And this place happens to be very close to that, the Mankameshwar temple. That is one case. There are seven other mosques documented by Sitaram Ji Goyal in his book What Happened to Temples. And these are cases where proper epigraphs or contemporary historical evidence exists. Those historical evidences are not by some RSS fellow or a BJP fellow. These are evidences in the form that the court writer of those Muslim rulers themselves is writing that, okay, we pulled down such and such a such temple, and in place of that, this and this mosque came up. So seven temples of that nature, seven mosques of that nature have been in Agra. I'm just speaking about Agra. There is, of course, a list of 2,200 temples with proper documentary evidence which Sitaramji Goel has listed. So, of course, there is a mention of 65,000 temples being destroyed. In case of Agra, this much. And Sitaramji was in a habit, he was not exaggerating, he would not go into a hyperbole. Whatever clear cut proof only he got, that alone he has written. Whether it is Babar himself mentioning the destruction of a temple, or whether Aurangzeb's chroniclers in Masere Alamgiri or whatever. Well, so only those things with incontrovertible proof. That's what has come into Sitaramji's book. Out of that, seven temples are mentioned in the Agra district alone. Then, besides these, the case comes of the Agra Fort also, because Agra Fort is where all the history of Agra becomes contentious. So they say, no, this was city was built by, the town was laid down by Sikandar Lodi, and the fort was built by Akbar. That's not the case. And mercifully, in most places, no, the Indian government or the Indian archaeological fellows, they remain in denial. Not so in case of Agra Fort. They have actually put a epigraph saying that this fort was a fort called Badalgad Fort, built by Raja Badal Singh in 1475. So 30 years before Sikandar Lodi is supposed to have built Agra. Now, even Raja Badal Singh, a Sikarwar Rajput, he has not built that fort. He has actually renovated that fort. The fort which Masood Sultan mentions during the time of demolition by Ibrahim Ghazni is that very fort. It was a mud fort. Those days in my area, they used to be called Gadi. Gad, it's not Gad. Gad is a large, big fort, or Gadi. Gadi is a smaller fort. These Gadi and Gad are made out of mud, very thick mud fortifications. So it is one of that. Even now, when you come to my part of the area, in this bridge area, you will find villages by the name of Gadi Gaunpur, Gad Umrao. Those kind of names are there. When you go into the village, nothing of sort is there. But at one time, this shows that there was a fortification, mud fortification. Similar kind of a mud fortification dating to 11th century existed at Agra Fort, attested by this gentleman Masood Salman, and later fortified by Raja Badal Singh, which actually Akbar renovated again one more time. So that is how the history of. So primarily these are not buildings built on bare ground by these people. These are improvisations. These are renovations.
Such a wonderful way to put it, because generally the faith-based colonialists, I call them, they destroy the local culture. The symbols of the local culture are the architecture, the language, the scriptures, the folklore of the local places, and then they plant on it their own symbols and call it their own. I'll give you one classical example. In Guadalajara, in Mexico, there's a place called Lady of Guadalupe, and before the Spaniards came, she was already there. In if you're from the Hindu culture, then you can understand that we worship the energy of God as a Devi,
Absolutely.
and that's how we have feminine divinities which we worship. Like just few days back was Navratri, where we discussed 9 forms of Devi Parvati. And so in this place, since there was no local story there, the Vatican implanted a story on Juan Diego. And Juan Diego is just like in India, if you don't know somebody's name, you call it Ram Bharose, or some general name, or
Right.
in America, you call it John Doe.
John
Now
Doe.
you create an imaginary person, imaginary deity, and the Vatican told them and did a fake story on how one miracle he showed on curing a sick woman, and then asked the locals to worship. So they destroyed that place, rebuilt it, and then claimed it as a Vatican Christian site. Now this is just a modern thing in Mexico. Now, same thing they have done in India, but they did it in a worse way to humiliate others, locals.
True.
They destroyed the place. On top of it, built their own place of worship just to show that we invaded you. So it's like a symbol of invasion, and this is the mindset of most of the colonial powers. And I also call these Islamic invaders as colonial powers, because they were there just on the basis of their faith. They did not own anything. They did not have a nation, because if you go back to their nation, there's nothing existing. There is a very famous American saying, when they describe Afghanistan, they call it a pile of rocks, and that's what Americans call them. And so when they bomb a pile of rocks, nobody is bothered.
Ah,
So
yes.
because it's just a pile of rocks. But it's not the case with India, because India had a running civilization over there. So when these people said nothing existing before they came, it's itself a lie which people don't. It's like they're creating a mythology.
True.
So,
Very true.
what you tell me these stories, this is nothing but creating a fake narrative, and so that they can continue to humiliate the local people, or in that time try to subjugate them, showing that we can do much more damage to you. It's a threat also. And like you correctly mentioned, that all these different masjids are made right on top of the old temples, or in a place where more Hindus were there, and it's all over the place. And if anyone tries to put logic or reasoning over there, they show, oh, we have numbers. That's the
Yes.
only logic you have, with numbers. But it's a world given fact that numbers have never played out in a military conflict.
True.
It's the
True.
skill and the strength of a small minority which wins the wars.
Correct.
So uh, so this is the logic they have. So what else is there
Yes.
in that
So
area? Yes.
I'll come to the Puranic historicity also, Aditya ji,
Yeah.
because actually that is the most prominent or the most interesting part we are interested in. No.
Mm.
So where does the Agra name actually come from? Eliot and Dawson uh, they quote this Tariq-e-Daudi.
Hmm.
There is a Eliot and Dawson are a very prominent historians from England, and they have compiled a beautiful history of India. So they say, and there are other, of course, other beliefs, but because now we give a lot of importance to written history, so I'm quoting Eliot and Dawson. So they say that Agra was basically Agra one, like Vrindavan,
Hmm.
like Nidhi one. This area, if you see, no, from Mathura onwards, at Vrindavan itself, the Puranic lore says that river Yamuna was covering the area in a kind of sea from three sides. It basically became one sort of a island, and it was just open on one side. On three sides, it was covered from the river. After that, there was in that area itself there was a place called Nidhivan. Furthermore, you move, there were other ones. So this whole belt, not just Mathura or Vrindavan, the whole belt was a divine belt, and a lot of sages, lot of rishis and munis, they used to meditate and they had their ashrams. So out of that, there was a place called Agravan, where this city of Agra used to be at that point of time. So this is actually, this has a mention in Mahabharat also, and that mention of Mahabharat again is quoted by Eliot and Dawson. Now another theory is that there was a Angira Rishi in the area. On his name, Agra city came. Then there is a third theory that one Maharaja Agrasen, on his name this city was, Agrasen's father was Mr. King Vallabha. Vallabha's son Agrasen, he was in, on his name the city was named, or rather a town was named, and then he moved to a place called Agroha near Hisar, and leaving that city to his younger brother Sursen. So, and it will not be totally, you can't brush it aside, because Agroha is the place where the Agrawals claim their origin from. Similarly, there is a very large number of Agrawals in my area. In fact, they are the largest community demographically speaking. I don't want to divide the Hindu community into castes, but Agrawals form a big number in this region. So, in this region and then that Hisar region, it, if the present demography supports that claim, there must be some grain of truth to it. But my contention is that the other two theories, no, that Angira Rishi or Agrasen being here, again can come from Agravan, because once you live in a particular place, your names also derive from those places. It's a very common kind of a practice. So the Mahabharat mention of Agravan being this area, holds, might hold true. I will not say hold, it might hold true. In the Jain literature also, this area, this town is again mentioned as Argalpur. All of this will not happen, and the same kind of phonetics will not keep on repeating if there is not some substance to it. And one more thing I forgot to mention, that Ptolemy, who gave us the concept of a geocentric universe, he has mentioned the word Agra. So it goes that long back, actually. He's the first person in the West to identify Agra as Agra, Ptolemy.
And which was the year of Ptolemy?
Ptolemaic conception is before Galileo and Copernicus. So it is somewhere in the dark ages only, but it is surely before 1200.
So that was a well-known. So it's
Well-known city, yes. And
well-known
then they
city.
say, no, no, it was one Urdu Persian word Aage Ra, on the basis of which the city was named.
So they did have some brains. They tried to rename it, but they didn't touch upon the other aspects.
Right.
So if you want to lie, then lie completely. So, but you have
Completely.
to hide a lie.
Cleverly.
You have to work very hard.
Yes.
So coming back to this culture, we did speak about the Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb one time,
Yeah.
and coming back to this culture of Agra, you know, I I can say some experiences I have, and it's a beautiful culture over there, which has sustained over the number of years. And people say that the Agra Fort, was the inspiration behind Red Fort in Delhi also. Is that true?
Yeah, because after I think 1658, from 1526, when Babur gained control from the Lodhis in Battle of Panipat, from then onwards Agra was the capital, and then Shah Jahan moved his capital to Delhi, and the area of the name of the place which he built up his second fort, replicating the Agra fort, was called Shah Jahanabad. So the Delhi fort, because it was a later fort and there was ample land there, so it was a little bigger fort than the Agra fort. But of course, the inspiration, as you say, came from the Agra fort only. The red sandstone, which was used by Akbar, was again used there. And red sandstone, by the way, no, comes from this my belt only. Say 40-50 kilometers surrounding Agra. There is again a sea sort of area extending from Rajasthan to Madhya Pradesh. In that, because Agra is at that border of Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, so that is where the red sandstone comes from. They replicated the same thing there in Delhi also.
Coming back to the more historical, you talk about Stephen Knapp, and
Yeah,
the only thing comes to my mind is Tejo Mahal,
right.
and the complete it's a place of worship which has been desecrated by two fake mosques, and people say that a human being cannot be under such a small tombstone. uh, so some cat or dog has been buried there. Is that true?
See, I will not entirely buy this Tejo Mahala theory, very frankly. But there are certain very interesting aspects to the structure of Taj Mahal. See, first of all, what the story what we are told is that this was built in the memory of Mumtaz Mahal. But if you have seen Taj Mahal, the where is the Mumtaz Mahal's grave? The centermost place in the tomb is taken by Shah Jahan's tomb, not by Mumtaz. Actually, in the very center, even if two graves were to be accommodated there, they would be at one kind of a semblance of equality, one here, one there, neither at the center. Both in together forming the center. That kind of a structure one can imagine. But here, the centermost area is taken by Shah Jahan, and then on one side, is Mumtaz Mahal. Mumtaz. This Shah Jahan's tomb is bigger, more prominent. Mumtaz is smaller than that. So where is it? I mean, the way we are told that it was built in the memory of, I think this was built by the emperor. He was a megalomaniac emperor. He spent a huge amount of money on that mausoleum, draining the resources, coffers of the royal this thing treasury, and spent on those days. We are told how much, 20 lakh or something in those days. Imagine, or 13 lakhs, something like that, and getting marble from this place, that place, all the places. Mumtaz's body lay in one garden, and then after completion, first they thought of putting Shah Jahan in the center, and then by the side of it, Mumtaz. Say there is certainly something fishy, and it is not what we are told. It's not actually for Mumtaz. If it was Mumtaz, the two graves would have certainly had parity. Even if not prominence to Mumtaz, the two graves would have parity, and both together would have formed the center part of the tomb. It's not exactly like that. If anyone goes to the place, now they have actually stopped. Very few people are only allowed. You need to buy a ticket actually. Old days, no, we were seeing both the replica, which is on the ground floor, and the one which is one story below that. The top one is also exactly that same thing only, but the bigger grave in absolute center is of Shah Jahan. The one on the left to her to Shah Jahan is that of Mumtaz. It is like that. Something fishy, but I will not say that. Okay, I will not buy that Tejo Mahale claim completely, because see, that's not the way Sitaramji has taught us to. I mean, take history. He says there should be incontrovertible proof. There should be some epigraph. There should be some map. There should be some historical document. So those are still missing. At a later date, if somebody finds it, okay, good.
Yeah, somewhere it has to be dug all around the place. I think
Right.
KK Mohammed ji can do a wonderful job. If somebody can dig around the whole place, you'll find a lot of things, because most of these looters, they ran away. I mean, they were lazy also in many ways,
Yes,
and
yes, yes,
they would bury the same evidence right there itself.
yes.
Now, coming back to one interesting theory which comes about the Agra is the food eating habits, which
Ah,
is generally popularized to be Mughlai.
Mowgli.
And most of the Agra city, which I can just remember, is vegetarian. Most of them.
Vegetarian. Yes, yes,
And
yes.
so how this concept of Mughlai became prominent, because Mughlai, if you look at any Mongolia or Turkmenistan or any of these places, they have spiceless food. In
Yes,
fact, whatever spices they use comes from
yes,
India.
yes.
So how can they become Mughlai when they had no taste? Afghanistan was a Hindu country during that
Right.
time,
Yes, yes,
and
yes,
Afghanistan used to get most of their spices from Panchnad, which is Punjab today,
yes.
and that's how they used to get their spices. So there, so how can the word Mughlai became famous, which is has no origin in
I
ancient
think
India?
this all takes us to the point where we started from. I said no. There is a very concerted effort to tell us that everything good in India has come from those people only. You yourself had nothing actually to show up. So I'll tell you a very interesting thing about Agra and its cuisine, because he said no, the place is predominantly vegetarian. A very interesting part. Even if a Muslim has a feast at his home, I mean a marriage feast, or after a child's birth or something like that, a lot of Muslims also have that 100% vegetarian fare. Imagine this happens only in this region, because they know no, there might be that social this thing also pressure that okay, a lot of our Hindu friends would also come to attend it, so it should be a total vegetarian fare. Otherwise many people might not be able to take. But it's a very important thing that even Muslims, many Muslims, I will not say all of them, but so many Muslims have a 100% vegetarian fare at the marriage receptions or the walimas, what they call. In some cases what they will do, if they have a non-veg fare, they will also have one more vegetarian feast for these people. And the vegetarian fare is relished by everyone. It's irrespective of the religion, whether he's a Muslim or a Hindu. So it is there. And then as you rightly said, all the spices were from this land only. We actually faced enslavement or slavery because of the spices only. Vasco da Gama came, I mean, following a Gujarati merchant ship. Where does this man bring the spices from? Spices, cloves, and all that. They used to cost so much. So he was following the Gujarati merchant all the way from Portuguese port or the Spaniard port, and from Cape Comorin and all that, and he came up to Kerala and all those places. So following a Gujarati merchant, so spices are our a gift to the world, and this kind of fare. And basically, I think the Mughlai fare and all, it gets the name because some kind of a patronage would have been received by these cooks from that area only. Agra, if you come to Aditya ji, there is a eatery by the name of Ram Babu Paratha Wala. It's a very famous eatery. That is the place where they called the Mughlai paratha came from. Now the interesting thing about Rambabu is that his forefathers were actually cooks in the Mughal harems. Mughal harems, because in those harems also there were so many Hindu queens also who were pure vegetarian. So to cater to them, they needed someone who didn't use garlic, onion, and all that. And so their forefathers were actually there. So they brought, and they had some patronage from the Mughals. So the way they started cooking, they said, okay, Mughlai, Mughlai, Mughlai. But it was basically a total vegetarian fare.
People do not know, and I think many of the people will agree with me, that the most of the ancient Persian meals were vegetarians,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
cannot do fire worship without eating non-vegetarian food.
Yes.
And the India suffered the worst Islamic faith-based colonialist attacks from after Persia was converted into Islam. So the Indian attacks on India started coming on from 655 AD afterwards in the modern timelines. And the for first 900 years they could not conquer Afghanistan. It was a very strong Hindu belt. And then after that they start trickling into Pakistan and other places. And then most of the Central Asian converts attacked it the worst. So in India, the version of Islam that came was Ajami Islam, which was a totally Persian version of Islam, and which was much more brutal than the original one, much more brutal, because it had the elements of Central Asia in it. Now, I just asked this theory on Big Bang. I have a question on Big Bang. Sometimes I tell people that bomb has never produced constructive in any society. If you have to demolish something, then you use a bomb.
Yes.
But bomb has not produced gardens, bomb has not produced beautiful buildings, and bomb has not produced definitely anything constructive. It has only caused destruction. Now, when these invading cultures came for the intent of destroying, and one of the things they brought was to humiliate the local population, they had to invent one way or the other to trouble them. And so, force feeding of meat is prominent only in India and to some extent Pakistan, because these are the converted kafir countries according to their culture.
Yes.
And so, this was force feeding was only there. But many pockets of Jordan, many pockets of Iraq, many pockets of Turkey, or anyone on the Mediterranean coast are avowedly vegetarian. The world vegan capital is not in India, it's in Tel Aviv.
Okay.
So it must be the old culture.
Yes.
So why this meat eating was introduced only in a vegetarian country, Hindu, again a sign of humiliation that we are superior, we have a different type of food. And it takes a lot more effort to prepare a vegetarian, non-vegetarian meal than a
Yes.
vegetarian meal because of the
Yes.
human, the way the human body is made. So I'm not advocating one way or the other, but these are the facts. That and now if you look at it, most of the advanced now in USA, if you are a vegetarian or a vegan, you're automatically high class.
Yeah.
It's a totally reverse mindset because it's a much more.
Yes.
You will not find poor people becoming vegetarian. Poor
Yes.
people go to McDonald's.
Yeah.
But the rich people who can afford, they go to Whole Foods, they go to other prominent places and like the niche shops where they can buy vegetarian meals. So, so the whole concept was of showing someone down that we have a better diet, but how is it better if it produces more diseases? The
Absolutely.
very one famous American philosopher said, "My body is not a graveyard." Very simply, he said.
Okay.
I think Mark Twain it was that my body is
Very
not a
nice.
graveyard. So
Great.
coming back to the culture of this place, like you mentioned, there are many temples, many gadis. So that means there must be a lot of armies also over there.
Yes.
It was well fortified so that people. It may not be. Was that the also part of the history, like fortifications, like you mentioned?
Fortifications, of course, from the beginning, fortifications are needed because if it is not invaders from the Middle East or the Central Asian countries, they had some sort of a challenge from the domestic crowd also.
Uh-huh.
So, of course, fortifications were there, but the challenge was not so much as it was, as you said, no, there was a certain kind of a brutality which came in with these kind of invasions, which was earlier not there. So, a mud fortification at the most, no, it guarded you from cannon fire or cannon balls. Beyond a point, it was helpless, uh, and that is where the stone structures came later on. And in this region, basically, because it was actually a religious kind of a belt, Mathura, Agra, and all that. So people have not thought about fortifying the places against invading armies, because one thing is there in the Indian culture, or rather the Hindu culture, that you could be in different territories, you could remain in different kingdoms, but when it came to the religious places or the tirtha sthals, the access was there for everyone. a king from Kashi or from any of the North Indian king could very comfortably go to Rameshwaram and do his religious obligations and return back. Nobody would harm him. Same with the pilgrims also. So this region was basically a pilgrimage. So those kind of only these mud fortifications also what I'm speaking about came in after 14th or 15th century, and there is a reason to it. What happened? Uh, at the time of Vallabhacharya is I think 16th century because he's a contemporary of Akbar.
Correct.
So in his time, this place had virtually become barren. Delhi to Agra, the place had become virtually barren. N number of people coming from here to there, Agra to Delhi, Delhi to Agra, and it was on the periphery of the Delhi Sultanate, and almost routine invasions were there. So in fact, Vallabhacharya has repopulated the city of Mathura. Vallabhacharya is basically a Telugu Brahmin who comes from South India. His generation settled there in Kashi, in Varanasi. Then, because he came to know about the plight of the people in Mathura and how these Muslim rulers were treating the local people over there, people had actually fled. People had fled Mathura. So he went there, he asked his children to marry as many local women as possible and reproduce. And there is a community called Goswamis. In due course of time, in due generations, an entire locality of people called Goswamis came into being there, and they have faced the wrath of a lot of Muslim invaders. Actually, they were the ones who thought of very narrow streets. If you come to Brindavan, no, you hear something about the Kunj Galis of Brindavan, the narrow lanes or the narrow bylanes. This was something which these people only thought. Vallabhacharya's descendants say if the Mughal army or any other invader, if he comes attacking our Lord, be it our Bake Bihari or at the Janmasthan temple, they will have to pass through very narrow bylanes, and then more resistance can be offered. That is why the idea of the narrow lanes came all over North India. So this is a very interesting part about it. There were very few fortifications. Mud fortifications came later on, but because there were no fortifications, these people suffered very badly. They were trampled upon. It is actually Vallabhacharya who thought of Govardhan. If you have been in this area, Govardhan is the highest place. So he said, okay, let me fly the saffron flag as high as it is possible. And where is the highest place? The highest place in that area was the Govardhan. So it was kind of a rebellion. Okay, I am here, I am challenging you. I put the flag on the top of the the highest area in this place. And then, as we all know, the repeated attacks were again made, and Aurangzeb made their life really miserable. So this Vallabh Sampradaya at one point of time collected all the deities from there, and one of the deity from Govardhan actually landed up in Nathdwara, which is near Udaipur. And the Rajputs king over there, the Mewar kings, they gave patronage to that deity because others were frightened of the Mughal rule. So that's how it landed there. So fortifications actually not so many. They came to think of mud fortification only later on, and because we did not have so many fortifications, people suffered.
So when we talk about Braj, is the
Yes.
Braj part of Agra or is it a bigger region than Agra?
Yeah. So Agra is very much a part of Braj. Of course, the center of Braj is Mathura, and then there is an adjoining district, Bharatpur, in Rajasthan, which will also come in Braj. Then there is another district uh, by the side of Agra, Aligarh, which will come in Braj. There is one more district recently carved out, Hathar. It will be around 6 or 7 districts within Uttar Pradesh, and 1 or 2 districts of Rajasthan also, which will form Braj. So Braj is a little bigger region.
Big area.
Basically, Lord Krishna's playground, one can say. It is believed that Agravan is a place where Lord Krishna used to come with his friends to play here. 50-55 kilometers, taking his herd of cows and all. He used to come to this place.
Yeah, pretty much understandable. Like up to Itawa, you can say Itawa. Itawa.
Uh, Etawah will not come, but Firozabad, there is another district in between Agra and Etawah, which comes, which is actually a part of Braj region only,
Like the
Firozabad.
Eta and Manpuri will also be part of that?
Eta and Manpuri, that area is actually called Kampil. Eta, Manpuri, even Etawah, that comes under Kampil, and Kampil is a bigger, larger, the larger dominion is actually Panchal, under which there is a small territory called Kampil. Panchali basically came from that region. So Bareilly to this place will actually come from, before the place was reshaped and renamed as Rohilkhand. Bareilly to this place, Etawah, was actually Kampil.
Oh, Panchal, that is Drupad's kingdom.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So a great conversation, and then I wish I can continue with you for hours because I think you have a wealth of knowledge in that area. And for
My
viewers who are watching it for the first time, that was a part of the history of very prominent area of India, and which all of you know as the home of Taj Mahal. And we were trying to see the history of that place. And some of you would like to visit there, do contact Vikas Saraswat ji, and I'll also make you connect with him if you want to. And for all the viewers who will watch it on YouTube, please do subscribe and comment on this content, and let us know your feedback. We're going to do many such similar sessions with Vikas ji. He's a writer, he's a columnist, he's an activist. In many hats he wears, and so it's a pleasure to have him on the show. Thank you so much, Vikas ji.
The
Namaskar.
pleasure was all mine, Aditya ji.